Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. The World Bank is slated to release the 2018 version of its Ease of Doing Business Index shortly, with the Narendra Modi government hopeful of a significant jump on the back of reforms it has undertaken recently. After a poor show last time, media reports quoting sources have said that India has risen 30 positions to rank 100th among 190 countries. The Narendra Modi government, which has vowed to remove red tape, eliminate procedural delays and turn India into a sought-after investment destination, has set a target of leapfrogging to a rank of 30 in the Doing Business survey by 2030. Last year, India came in at 130 on the index, below countries like Ghana, Vietnam and Uganda. Following this, Prime Minister Modi had asked his ministries to ace the reform work. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business report. Joining me on the program today are Dr. Arvind Virmani, former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director of the Business Standard, and Ajay Shankar, former Secretary, DIPP. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Dr. Virmani, I'd like to begin with you. Of course, there are several media reports that are speculating that India has jumped 30 places in the Ease of Doing Business report. We'll not get into speculation at the moment, but as far as ease of doing business in this country is concerned, do you believe that it has become better over the last 3 years?
Yeah, so just very brief background. First in 2014, when the new government came, it announced it was going to focus on this and was going to be very specific and take the index as an indicator. So at that point, me and others have pointed out that a few countries like Saudi Arabia, etc., had done that, focused on this particular index and improved quite significantly. So last year it was a bit disappointing when we more or less remained the same, hardly moved one place this side or that side. So given that perspective, I think it's very good that is finally having an impact. So it's very encouraging. So that's what I would say generally. I'm sure my friend here has the background to the earlier efforts which were made, but I think the key difference was that not only focus on general ease of doing, but also on the specific indicators in the index, and in particular from where and how they were derived. So when you're talking about global picture and global comparative, I think that was a good approach, and I hope they continue it to do further progress along these lines.
Sure. Mr. Shankar, as far as this report itself is concerned, do you believe that the government's initiatives over the last couple of years have actually helped India in improving ease of doing business?
Surely. I mean, the government has been committed to improving the ease of doing business, and if the reports are right that we will gain about 30 points in the ranking, it shows that with sustained effort, you do get good results. It also shows that you don't get good results overnight. So I agree with Dr. Virmani that we need to sustain the effort and really target reaching in the first 30, not by 2030, but 2022, because it's doable according to
So it's doable. Reaching the top 30 by 2030 is what you're suggesting?
2022.
Okay, 2022 is what you're saying. Okay, that's great. That's an optimistic way to start and look at things at the moment. But Mr. Bhattacharya, why is this index so important for us?
Well, it's important because it is an index that is prepared by the World Bank, just to sort of explain, you asked this question why it is important. It essentially focuses on the red tape prevailing in a country and administrative hurdles, and it is based on 4 essential sources of information. One, it goes into the laws on the statute book. It goes into feedback from experts in the area, and goes into consultation with the government, national government, and also it consults its World Bank staff. So there are 4 sources of information, feedback that it receives before the index is put in place. So if indeed the reports are saying that India has scaled 30 notches higher, which clearly shows that things have improved, but let me inject an element of realism into this, euphoria, which will obviously follow, which is that this is an index which is based on what is happening in 2 of India's cities, which is Delhi and Mumbai. We are yet to see the index covering 8 more cities that are likely, that was promised by the World Bank. I mean, there are many countries where they are taking 11 cities, but in India, they are focusing on what is happening to red tape and the administrative hurdles in 2 specific cities. So therefore, to conclude that the ease of doing business has improved dramatically in the whole of the country would probably be an exaggeration, and we should focus more on what this index tells you more about what is happening in Delhi and what is happening in Mumbai. That's the primary point. And the secondary point I would like to make is that a better indication probably will come, which World Bank itself will bring out with the enterprises survey, which actually it goes into details as such how enterprises in different parts of the country feel. So therefore, I think a broader sense of what is happening in this country would be available by if you merge the findings of both the ease of doing business index and the World Bank enterprises survey.
Sure. Dr. Virmani, would you agree with that assessment that, you know, the World Bank has just limited its index to Mumbai and Delhi and it doesn't bring out the whole picture of the country on the whole?
See, yes and no. I mean, as a just statement of fact, that is correct. But the point is that I am not sure there are any 11 cities. I have not come across ever a country with 11 cities this thing. So the point is that basically India is a larger country, spread out, has more cities like China and a few others. In most countries, one city is the hub. For example, in Indonesia and Thailand, between 30 and 50% of economic activity actually occurs in the capital city. Now, that's not true of India. So, India is more diverse. So, it works both ways. In a comparative sense, we have to have a benchmark. We can, of course, improve and change the benchmark. But I think as far as the index itself is concerned, what we are really saying is not that things are great in the country, but that comparatively, we have improved by 30 ranks and we should take it for what it is. Now, in the sense that Mr. Bhattacharya is giving a caveat, that caveat is correct. But then there is also the perspective which I have just given, which is a comparative improvement.
Okay.
Oh, of course, it is an improvement.
Yeah.
There has been a comparative improvement, and that's what we should appreciate is what Dr. Virmani is saying. But let's look at how to improve
further.
How to improve further. Mr. Shankar, what needs to be done to take it to the next level? Do you believe that we are on the right trajectory?
I meant it seriously when I said we should target 30 in 2022. And the reason why I say it is feasible is that the push for digital governance should enable us to come amongst the top 30 over the next few years in almost all the parameters except 2. Of 2, where we were at the bottom, and I suspect we'll still be somewhere near the bottom, are bankruptcy and enforcement of contracts. Now, in bankruptcy, we've got our act together. The process is on, the legislative framework is there. So, in a year or 2, the system should be working well enough with close monitoring and supervision to bring us up pretty high. The one where we have to achieve a real breakthrough is enforcement of contracts, where we are right at the bottom. And that is a tough one because it basically means bringing efficiency into the working of our judicial system. For some reason, that has been a no-go area till date. So, while we have excellent judges, brilliant judgments, outstanding lawyers, if you look at from the perspective of an economic player, the Indian judicial system is broke. It doesn't work. It doesn't deliver. And an efficient judicial system is the core of the modern capitalist industrial economy. And here we are at the bottom. But I think if we set our mind to it and work in genuine partnership with the judiciary, in 4 or 5 years we should be able to make a difference.
I would just add one more thing to this, which is the construction, because land and construction is in the state domain completely. Actually implicitly linking to what Mr. Bhattacharya also said, that is also in my view a pretty difficult task. Now, of course, if all of them accept the electronic platform, then my friend here would be right. But I have doubts whether the states can be, all the states can be so easily persuaded.
Sure. You know, Mr. Bhattacharya, what do you...
there is an issue, and I agree with him, that the transition to digital mode of functioning has a real barrier in the political economy side, which is the rent seeking.
Yeah.
So now, but I think from the point of view of the political leadership of all states, they would like to get investment, they would like to show progress and results. So I think the situation is appropriate and ripe for determined political leaders to take care of this rent-seeking behavior and to move forward.
So these are the positive impacts of demonetization is what you're suggesting that we are seeing being played out at this point in time, because a major push of it was digital,
I think
achieving digital India.
governance is separate from monetization.
Okay, all right. Let's move on then. Mr. Bhattacharya, what do you believe are going to be the biggest challenges going forward as far as ease of doing business in India is concerned?
Well, for me, one is the methodology challenge. I think we must really push for expanding the coverage of this index to make it more real to at least 8 cities in this country, which is what the World Bank had promised us. And these 2 cities are just not, at least 6 more cities where the bulk of the businesses are actually spread must be included. Where the cities are Bangalore, Chennai, Calcutta, Ahmedabad, we need to bring them in, because the kind of the laws that this index looks at are actually state level laws. It is not the national laws that are being looked at from Delhi or even from the capital of of Maharashtra. So therefore, it is important that at least 6 more cities must be added as was promised. Number 2, I personally feel that I will go back to the need for factor market reforms even in these areas, wherein the areas of availability and making a land available is takes a lot of 190 days was the last survey, that you make a piece of land available to somebody to start business in this country was 190 days. Now that seems to be the area of focus. So therefore, we need to put in place a system by which land allotment, construction permits, this is the first factor market reform. The second factor market reform I would like to stress on is the labor reforms, where both in terms of hiring as well as retrenching with proper compensation mechanism in place should be there. Only 2 states so far have actually made some movement, whereas other states, and forget about the center, I think some work has to happen on both these areas, on both labor market reforms and the land reforms.
Okay. Dr. Virmani, as far as the parameters itself of some of this index is concerned, do you believe that what are the parameters really that are used to come out with this index, and do they change? Because this is the 15th report, if I'm not wrong, that the World Bank will be coming out with. And do these parameters change over the years?
No, they don't change substantially. We've already mentioned 2 or 3 of them. Let me mention one where we are still not doing well. And that is what they call cross-border business, which is basically trade, what we call import-export trade. And here it's very important for your reader also to understand that we've not had EXIM policy reform for something like 5 years. It's not just this government, but even the previous government for many, many years did nothing on trade reform. So it's, in my view, overdue. In fact, in that book which you may have heard of, what was it, the India at 70, Modi at 3.5, yes. I have a chapter on tax reform where I mention trade reform, and so that will link to ease of doing business, and it's very important for the country because much trade now is through supply chains. Again, my friend here has done some work on that. And so you have to have this easy movement. You got to be able to bring in components, put them up, send them out, bring them back. So this cross-border ease of doing business is now critical, not only to doing business itself, but also for exporting.
Okay, so cross-border trade is something that we'll need to look at very seriously, is also that is what you're suggesting. Mr. Shankar, what else do we need to look at very closely?
I think I would be inclined to take forward Mr. Bhattacharya's argument that ease of doing business is a major building block, but it is not enough. So ease of doing business, a very high ranking, is not a sufficient condition for a lot of investment and growth. So I think we should not lose sight of the big picture, because I'll only quote a senior MNC CEO in a seminar on this issue, where he said that ease of doing business is important, but more important for me is business. So I must focus on the business case for new investment and business and growth. And it would be a little short-sighted to be content with getting a high ranking on ease of doing business, because you can have a very high ranking there and still have very modest growth and very modest investment. So I think the big picture should not be lost sight of.
Okay, the big picture should not be lost in all of this, is what you're suggesting. Mr. Bhattacharya, as far as the index is concerned, now say for instance we break into the top 100, does that also mean that automatically FDI is going to improve, because you've broken into the top 100 of the index.
Well, it definitely makes India a better investment destination because the foreign investor, even the domestic investor feels encouraged that this is the place where you can do business with relative ease. So this goes without saying that a better index ranking will definitely make India a better investment destination. But what I would once again stress here is this, that this is an index based on what is there on the statute. It is an index based on what the rules are. So there is a possibility of a difference between what is de jure and what is de facto. So therefore, it is very important that the index is very good to attract investments here, but to ensure sustained investment and repeat investments in the same areas, in the same states, it is important the gap, if any, between de facto and de jure must be bridged. So therefore, it is important to get into the top 50 ranks, as the Prime Minister has actually indicated it to be the target, but it is equally important to make sure that the rules that are framed in the rule book should also go down to the reality and actually get implemented, which is why I said that the World Bank Enterprises Survey probably gives you a better indication of what is happening on the ground instead of what is there in the government rule books.
Okay, talking about investment.
Right, but let me, let me put it slightly differently. See, a businessman who is in India, especially a large businessman, knows what the conditions are. If he's operating in Kanpur or Calcutta, also have a reasonable idea because they have people here. Where it really matters in the middle and high-tech industries, for example, in Europe or Italy, we just had the Italian Prime Minister, which are all based on what their version of small and medium. I think it's much more important for them because they go by such indicators much more than large companies who have the resources to send people here, find out what's happening, etc. So I would really focus, for example, if I was publicizing from the government side, I would focus on attracting these higher tech, small, medium companies in Europe and America, etc., by using this index.
If you look at the index in the past, Mr. Shankar, a country like Bhutan, Nepal too have fared fairly well. What is it that they do differently that we don't do? I mean, why is it that they fare so high, so well in the index?
In fact, what I would like to do is to take up the point of Mr. Bhattacharya that the enterprise survey will be important. And the enterprise survey may give us an honest picture and may still not give us an honest picture. But the hard reality is that the perception across the world and within India is that for businesses there is a rent-seeking environment, which therefore makes it unattractive for people to enter into business or for small and medium enterprises from Europe to come into India. Now, that perception has to change. And when that perception changes, then the reality will change very fast. Because today, if you look at the hard facts, very few people who are not in business in India choose to start up new enterprises. And they don't do it because of the rent-seeking environment that we have. Now, the rent-seeking environment can move and can radically alter, partly through e-governance, which is efficient, and partly through better political governance. If both these...
perception is changing, no doubt. And I think the index, better ranking would definitely change that perception for the better. But to repeat what Dr. Vermani and Mr. Shankar said, is that the ease of doing business index is only an index for ease of doing business, which is the red tape administrative hurdles. Now, if you're talking about the investment climate, that constitutes many other factors. And I think ease of doing business is one of them. So therefore, if we scale up on this index, which is a good thing, and it actually focusing on whether the rule book has been tweaked correctly and made it better. So therefore, to that extent, definitely the perception is improved. But if you want to improve the investment climate, there are a host of other issues that need to be tackled. This ease of doing business only tackles what the rule book says and whether your electricity construction permits or electricity connections or land construction, these things are being eased or not, and that too on paper.
You know, let's broaden the scope of the debate and talk about investment on the whole, since ease of doing business, of course, is one of the parts of it. You know, as far as investment on the whole is concerned, we've seen that domestic investment has not picked up, and that's going to continue to be a problem. How do we address that?
Well, you know, the investment right now is struck mainly because of the twin balance sheet problem that we have been talking about for quite some time. On the one hand, you have got the banks which are stressed. On the other hand, you have got the corporate sector which is over leveraged. So unless you get out of this jam, so to say, I don't see investments reviving in a short time. So it is going to be a long haul, and along with that, you need to undertake the kind of reform that we are talking about. You are talking about the factor market reforms, and it is only then that you see the bank lending improves. For example, the recapitalization of banks, that was, in my view, is a good move, at least a good first step, which if followed up with second and third steps by bringing about changes in the way banks do their businesses, can actually bring about a qualitative change in the way banks get back into the business of not just recovering their past undated loans, but actually extending new loans. So therefore, it's a long haul, but you need to take those steps, and some steps have been taken, as I said, but many more steps will have to be taken going forward.
Yes, Dr. Virmani.
So, you know, I recently did a working paper on this issue, and I identified, well, first you have to be clear where the decline in investment has come. It turns out that it's come in the household sector and in structures, which is housing, buildings and other structures. And there are basically three causes. One is the high real interest rate. Second is this so-called twin balance sheet, but here mostly the bank part of it, I would stress. And the third was an odd thing which I identified, which is that demonetization is actually, you know, demonetization is putting pressure from the top against corruption, but the bottom corruption is going on. So actually the people who would invest in housing and buildings are kind of caught in the middle. So it's part of the transition problem in a sense, because you're cutting down too hard on the top, but the bottom is still proceeding.
How long is the problem going to last?
Well, the state level, this is all related to the earlier things we have discussed. The land and housing, the land and construction problem is at the state level. So there's not much the central government or the union government could do directly. The only way it can do is by persuading, maybe through Niti Aayog, maybe through discussions to get that bottom part moving. Because as I said, this is peculiar. The people who want to invest are actually caught in the middle. They don't know which way to go. The bottom guy is demanding money. I mean, let's be very frank. Okay. The top is saying, if you do any black, I'm going to get you. Okay, so you are caught in a dilemma.
The land thing, I will add the labor market.
Yeah,
that is also something that needs to be done.
Sure. Yeah, Mr. Shankar, your closing concluding remarks on the program.
I think in the short run, the government does need to focus on sectors where there is some policy space for generating demand and getting growth going. So construction industry is a good sector. It's labor intensive. It was a major engine of growth. For the last 5-6 years, it is in doldrums. Now, the way government is designed, it is nobody's baby, because the Urban Development Ministry wants to regulate and take care of the consumer. But there is nobody who's taking a holistic view that is there anything we can do to ease the problem of that sector.
Sure.
So similarly, labor intensive sectors. Now, India is sui generis, that our biggest advantage, which is labor, which is potentially very efficient and very cheap, is one we are unable to use to make our presence felt in global markets and labor intensive industries, and now even in domestic markets.
Right.
So the furniture we are buying is all imported. There's no reason for it to be imported.
Sure.
But if there are any policy instruments, it could be used.
All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Arvind Virmani, A.K. Bhattacharya, Ajay Shankar, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.